Okay, it's the end of the session. Before she leaves, this is Abigail. This is Annie. This is, I forgot your name with an M. Millie. And then this is, you can just say it.
Bree.
Bree. Spree, or
Bree.
Bree. Sorry about that, Bree. I didn't work with you very much. Okay, now Bree licked every time that that time I reached over. A lick can be a sign of stress, so you know. This is the roadmap to success. The video above, we worked with her and her, but I would work with all the dogs, and like I mentioned in that video, it might be different distances for different dogs and different reactions with different items and locations. So really vary it up. The industry that you do, you're used to kind of journaling stuff, so you might like keep a chart so you can kind of try different variations of it. You want that now? Okay, you didn't want it before. Okay, so basically we started off talking about exercise. These are not high energy dogs, but exercising them, she could, just like me, could probably use a little bit of thinning. And all the dogs, it's stimulating, it's they need to do things. And so they go for walks, and the guardian does a great job of letting them sniff on a walk. People don't realize often that the dog burns more energy on a walk by sniffing than they do from the locomotion of walking. And so the guardian's doing a great job of that. I shared some auxiliary forms of exercise, throwing the treats up and down the stairs. Let me see, scent games. You can use a laser for some dogs. Some dogs you shouldn't. If your dog drools or gets anxious or things like that, we definitely don't want that dog to be using it. It should be beneficial and positive. Another thing we could do is feed out of treat dispensing toys like a snuffle mat or an Omega Paw treat ball. Yes, you're going to come back up here. Mom doesn't want you to be up there. Now, it's important to remember good attention, bad attention. So if you don't want her to go up here and you go up there and then mom corrects, which she did off camera, the dog's like, oh, this is a great way to get your attention. And that's really throws a lot of people because we pet and reward the dogs for or not pet and reward. We chastise or verbalize or get up and whatever it is when the dog does the things we don't like. Yes. And then the dog, well, since good attention, bad attention, anything, I'm going to chew your carpet, I'm going to pee, I'm going to bark, I'm going to jump up. Let me see. So feeding, I would make sure you go to my website. I'm going to probably forget these when I do this originally. So when you look at the write-up and watch this particular video on the page, if I don't have, I want to have a link to the focus exercise and to structured feeding. And so if I don't have those linked, please call or text me and I can very easily add them. I want you to practice those. Well, we'll talk about them right now. So the focus exercise is 1 second, 1 second. Eventually it's 1 second, 15 seconds before it goes in the dog's mouth. So you have to practice that. And dogs don't generalize, so not just that, but any exercise you have to do in different parts of your house. And I would do it with each dog separately at first, and eventually you can get to the two. Yes, I see you want a little attention. Okay. But again, she's tapping me. And she was telling me she wants me to pet her here, and I'm okay with petting her, but we're going to talk about passive training and petting with a purpose in a minute, and that might change a little bit. Okay, and for, is Abby the one that, or they both kind of roll over when you, okay. So basically, if I reach over to pet a dog and it flips over on its back immediately, that's too submissive. I would withdraw and not engage with the dog. I don't chastise, I don't say no, I just tell the dog through my actions, that action gets my arm to move away. Then the dog rights itself and I reach over and start petting. And as soon as it does it again, then I might pull back. If this is initially, if you're petting her and she's like, oh, this feels good, and then gradually does it, that just means I'm comfortable and I love what you're doing. There are two distinct differences between those are two separate things. So also, before I forget, make sure you're petting all the dogs under the chin as much as possible. You can pet them anywhere you want, just avoid reaching over their head because that promotes a down nose orientation. Insecure dogs look down. Proud dogs have their nose up in the air. That's one of the reasons why we went over the focus exercise. So for focus, you want to practice that. I usually like to have 12 treats and follow the instructions there and let me know if you have any questions on that. Structured feeding will really help because they all like the food, but it's a nice way to add structure and help them practice self-control and discipline because they're not allowed to go in the kitchen or be near the other dog when it's eating. These two might be able to eat at the same time because they're really Watusi, but I like to usually feed them one at a time unless they are on the same level. Okay, so we went over exercise first. Next thing we went over was some rules. One of the rules I suggest is not allowing the dogs on the furniture for a limited period of time. Usually I say 90 days or as long as the problems are still going on. She is the new addition to the family and she kind of is throwing shoulders, elbows a little bit, trying to assert herself. And it's kind of starting to go past just kind of asserting herself, now trying to take things over. And so the video above will cover that. But when I can't remember, one of these was here on their guardian's lap and she was on the floor and she approached, this dog was kind of baring teeth, which is, again, not aggression. But that could be the beginning of fight. And now these dogs did growl a little bit. The problem is she's deaf. She's not going to hear that. So sometimes we might need to manage that. The dog's here, or might kind of semi-cross my leg or something like that, create a little bit of a boundary so the dog doesn't have to correct it. I took care of it myself and I helped that dog have more space. But if we take away access to the furniture, then they don't have anything to be possessive or protective over. And we want them to get into a habit of doing things the way we want them to do. And after about 90 days or so, it kind of becomes normal. Their neural pathways are locked in, the myelin sheath develops, and they just kind of get in the habit of continuing to do that. At that point, then you can let them on the couch if you want to, but it should be when you want to, not to reward. Remember, rewarding a dog by breaking a rule is very confusing and frustrating for the dog. So make sure that if you want to pet the dog or play tug of war or throw the ball or whatever it is, that's what you do to reward the dog. Don't break a rule for that. So the first rule is not being allowed on the furniture for the 9 days or as long as it's going on. Get carpet or whatever so you can lay on the floor with some pillows, and you can still cuddle with your dog as much as you want. But there are times where you come up here and they see a literal distinction between the two of you, and there's nothing to be possessive or protective of. Potentially you're even be close to your feet, but you can use the technique in the video above to work on that as well. Okay, so other rules we talked about, you have to sit at the door before I let you in or out. I go to the door and I say sit once. Let's say that these two are at the door. I tell them to sit. Annie sits and Abby doesn't. Well, then I would open the door and let Annie out, and Abby does not get out. I'm paying based on performance. One other thing we didn't talk about in the session, but a lot of times what I do like to do is pull out, if we just had these two dogs, I pull out 2 treats and say come, or sit, or whatever it is. If I say sit and Abby sits and Annie doesn't, then I would treat Abby and not treat Annie. I think I got that right, but whichever dog does it, you're going to pay based on performance. If the dog doesn't do it, there's no punishment. They just don't get the reward. Crash. And after a while, the dog will get in the habit of doing that, and the other dog be like, well, I better sit first so I can get that treat. If they give you the same effort, then I would give each dog a treat. So that's why I have 2 or 1 that I can split up. Now you get them motivated to compete, to be obedient. Right now they're competing for position, and that's kind of more of a territorial thing. It can create some issues. Not between these two, but amongst the pack. All right, so other rules, the dog should not be allowed in the kitchen when the human is eating in the kitchen or preparing food. I have a number of videos, I call it invisible boundaries. So if you go to doggoneproblems.com and click on where it says dog training tips, type in invisible boundary on the right side or the bottom of the page in the search box, you'll see a number of examples of that. If you have questions or problems with that, please let me know. I did it, was it her or was it Annie? Her, and she responded really, really well. But again, it's good to do that with 1 dog at a time. So we want them to practice. Just because I want to go inside the room doesn't mean I can, because my human has taught me not to do it. And so now the dog is practicing a little self-restraint, and that will help amongst fighting with each other and being possessive of toys and a lot of other things. Is building up a skill set, and it's also helping the human act like a leader, and enforcing all the rules is a great way to do that. So let me see. Whenever possible, if you're going out the door first, preferably you go out the door first. If you're letting them out, you don't have to go out first. But preferably you go in. For dogs, if they're on a leash or on a walk, whoever's in front can be perceived as the leader. But for what you're doing and your dogs, I'm not that worried about that particular one. We also, Taylor talked about passive training and petting with a purpose. Passive training is basically rewarding the dog when it organically does what you want. I did it here, I can't remember if it was Annie or Abby, but when the dog laid down, I reached over within 3 seconds and petted. Remember, you have 3 seconds to pet or correct a dog for them to have the ability to make the connection. But it has to be repeated consistently over and over again before the dog finally, the light bulb event happens. So consistency is the name of the game. And breaking the rules or letting the dog do something and not enforcing it is, remember, not disagreeing is the same thing as agreeing, and anything your dogs are doing when you pet them is you're rewarding. So when they sit, if you pet them and say sit, they lay down, she has a problem sitting. So every time she sits, pet her, preferably under the chin, and say for her, we're not going to say sit. You're going to come up with hand signals or whatever you want to do so that she understands how to do that on a command. And the other dogs just use the auditory cue. Now, if she's looking at you, speak normally. Don't over or under articulate, but dogs can read lips, and a lot of deaf dogs do learn to read the human's lips. So I always like to incorporate the hand signals as well, so the dog knows what it is. And you might want to Google and look for dog hand signals. You might get some good ideas. You don't have to use whatever they are, but sometimes you see one, I'm like, I didn't think about that one. Okay, so that's passive training. When the dog does something that you want without you asking, you pet and reward it or give it attention. Petting with a purpose is different. Petting with a purpose, both of the dogs that were here, Annie and Abby, both like to paw for attention. Pet me. You're not petting me. What's wrong with you? Pet me. Well, if she tells me what to do and I pet her, then, well, Leaders tell, followers ask. So if she tells me what to do and I do it, well, then I'm reinforcing, yes, I think you're my boss. But then when she tells me not to do, no, don't go out the door, don't do this, and I do it anyways, that stresses the dog out. All aggression comes from stress. Those dogs aren't really have the stress problem, except for here. But we look at kind of a holistic approach and prophylactically applying it to everything. So if the dogs get used to understanding what they can do to make you happy, they're going to be more inclined to do it. So if the dog comes up and paws at you or nudges you, and again, if you're doing the furniture rule, they wouldn't be on the couch anyways. Dog comes up and maybe paws at your shin instead of little boot scooting. If the dog paws at your skin, then I would just instead of petting the dog, I would tell the dog to sit or lie down. Give it a counter order. If it sits or lies down within 3 seconds, I reach over and pet it under its chin and pet it as much or as little as I want. If it doesn't do what I want within 3 seconds of the first time that I say it, I move on to other things. Playing hard to get works great for dating. It works equally good for dogs. So if you tell the dog, do what I want, I'm asking you to do the smallest thing you do as a dog and sit. And if you can't be bothered to sit, buddy, I can't be bothered to pet you. I've got to watch TV and check my notes, read emails. After a while, the dog starts to miss that attention. And they recognize that they can't tell you what to do anymore. They have to ask, and better than ask, they have to prepay for the attention. And they'll start coming and sitting in front of you to ask for attention. When she does, make sure well, they're all she's, right? Then pet her under the chin and say the word sit, and pet her as much or as little as you want. Let me see. We usually have a watchword for this, but the guardian here lives alone. So I put Post-it notes around in the areas that you're going to be when you're going to see the dogs to help you with a visual reminder. I have one person that like every half hour, Siri, tell me to pet with a purpose or whatever, pass it to the train. So phone go off, pass the train. They're like, dog sits, go over. And if, like, let's say the dogs sit on the dog bench across the room, you can just say the word sit. It's not as powerful, but it is a reinforcement. Okay, so also, when it comes to dogs, the very first thing, and I talked about in the video above, is usually a freeze or a stare. So a lot of times we don't see those first couple of signals. We see it when they actually start fighting. It's way too late. So what we want to do is start recognizing and watching that. So she's kind of looking, I can't tell because I'm behind her, but she's looking in this direction, and the two poodles are kind of grooming each other on the dog bed over here. And so she could be just watching, that's fine. But if another dog's approaching, she starts staring, and if a dog gets stiff or slow, moves in slow motion, those are big warnings. So if you start to recognize these things, it can really help. One of the things I tell my guardians to do, my clients to do, is to, that's a cute picture right there too, is to start recognizing and identifying your dog's body language when it's what we call neutral. So when she's walking around and everything's okay, there's no dogs, there's nothing else, nobody walking by, where her ears position, are they forward, are they side, are they back, are they out to this way? How is her tail? A lot of people think tail wagging means happiness. It means excitement. It's more where it's wagging, up, down, side to side. You should never pet a dog with the tail between the legs. That's kind of where the expression CYA comes of trying to cover their anus. And you pet the dog when that situation, and you can amplify it. So basically what we want to do is identify the dog's neutral body mechanic. Then once you identify neutral, you start seeing deviations from that. And you're like, ooh, the ears went back. Lick their lips, turn the head to the side, and kind of got frozen. Oh, the dog is saying, I'm uncomfortable with the cat approaching, or whatever it is. And then you can use the exercise above to extinguish that behavior, or move the other dog away, or take some action. The more that you take action, the less the dogs think that they need to do it on their own. We also went over the escalating consequences. If you forget what those are, please message me. I'm happy to go over them with you. I usually don't just show them on film because some people use them out of context. I don't know why I'm yawning. Long day. All right. Let me see. For the door, the dogs like to bark, and there's only one window kind of in the door where they can see outside, and they bark when they see dogs approach, and then the dog leaves. And to the dogs, that's an example of classical conditioning. I bark at the dog, and then it leaves. Well, that's not any more operant conditioning. But basically, so after a while, the dog thinks I saved the day. So, and remember, good attention, bad attention. The dog's barking over there like, stop or anything. It worked. Even if it stops the dogs from barking, it still got your attention. And so that makes them more likely to bark again in the future. So a lot of times we do, it's called maintenance, where we put like white paper or a film that the dog can't see through the bottom part of the window. As humans, we like light coming in, and dogs do at times. We like the light to come in, but this way we don't have to close the door. We can leave the door open, but we can see because we're taller. The dogs can't see. And so they hear something and they go and bark at the dog that's passing by the house. They don't see that it left, so they don't get the validation, and that takes away their motivation. I'm trying to think. Is there anything else that? Okay. Well, if you have any questions, things stop working, please text me or call me. The only time I get mad at my clients is if they have a problem and they don't let me know. Because if I don't hear from you, I assume that means everything's going great. That's our society. So I don't care if it's 7 years from now. If you have a question, you call or text me. If I don't hear from you, I can't help. All right. Well, Millie, Bree. And then over there off camera, we have Amy and Abby. And Abby and Annie, excuse me. Jeez, I'm getting them all wrong. My neurons are fatigued. And I'm David, and this is the roadmap to success. Remember, everything you do trains your dog, or dogs. Only sometimes you mean it.